Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast brought to you by Rallyday Partners. I'm Ryan Heckman, and I am here today with a gentleman named Jeff Hunter. Jeff is the founder of a firm called Talentism. Much like the other podcasts that we've done, this is one of those chance meetings that I got to participate in where I was like, oh my gosh, I want to spend more time with this fellow. I want to share his wisdom with other people. There's a lot to pack into this hour. A lot of times we focus kind of half on the journey of the founder and their kind of personal story, and then the other half on some of their, I'd say, like learnings and key takeaways. I think we're probably going to spend a bit more time on key learnings and takeaways today, just because of Jeff's subject matter expertise and alignment with Rallyday's obsession with personal development of our company's executives and employees. So hopefully that will be okay. Jeff, welcome to the Founders Journey podcast. We're very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to participate.
So, little background, Jeff, that will maybe provide some context for our time together today. My partner and co-founder of Rallyday, a woman named Nancy Phillips, we got an opportunity to meet when she first started her company, and that was about 25 years ago, when it was, subscale to be kind, and helping her, raise capital and that kind of thing. And we became friends through that process. And, 24 years later, we got to have dinner where we talked about her journey. She had just sold her business measured in the billions. And for me, it was just such a cool bookend dinner. And I asked her during that dinner what she was most proud of, going from her company had zero revenue when she got there, and she sold it for multiple billions of dollars. I asked her what she was most proud of, and she's Canadian, by the way. And so pride and Canadian, it's a complex relationship between pride and their Canadian heritage. But she was really quick to answer that over her 23-year time running this business, that she was most proud that she grew as an executive at a faster clip, or as fast a clip as the company was growing. And that was really a profound, I guess, observation that I sort of dwelled on for weeks, because I was thinking conventional wisdom is, there's the startup CEO and then kind of a scale up CEO and then, kind of like a real company CEO. And then you get to a mature business, and then we all know what that looks after that, like the person on CNBC. And that the same leader in my partner, Nancy, was able to grow personally as a leader and executive during those 23 years to the point where she had, we spent a lot of time talking about how she was able to do that and what attributes contributed to that achievement. And if you fast forward to Rallyday, we are trying to basically do the same thing that Nancy did. It's a muse for us. And I guess the musy question is, what if during our hold period, which is loosely 4 to 7 years, we could help the CEO and his or her team grow faster than the company, and help the employees on the front line grow personally and professionally, such that at the end, everybody sort of says the same thing, which is, boy, the business grew, but I grew even more. And that's kind of like the dreamy question that has created a calling here at Rallyday to invest in those frameworks and resources that can help us all grow together. And to bring it home to you, Jeff, we had reached out to you some months ago around a project to help do 360-degree reviews with our CEOs and with like the equivalent at Rallyday, and then do some coaching thereafter as part of that. And we interviewed a bunch of firms, and I'm proud to say we're going to be working with you all for the first time this year. And it was because of that conversation and that, I guess, interest that we're here today. So why don't we start with, how Jeff became Jeff? You've got an amazing background. Let me just, for a second, give some highlights. So Jeff went to Occidental College in LA. I suppose that's not like incredibly remarkable. It's a tiny little liberal arts school, as I understand it. I think it's where Barack Obama went to college.
For 2 years, yeah.
Okay. And you did some startup work. You ended up at Electronic Arts, as the head of people, more or less. And then ultimately with the famed investor Ray Dalio at Bridgewater Associates, and then started your own company, Talentism. I know those are like really big dots on a bigger piece of paper, but maybe connect those dots for us if you don't mind, and talk about some of your early influences as a child, even perhaps, and how you created such a remarkable arc during those years.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Just quick correction. I definitely was not the head of people at Electronic Arts. That was the remarkable Gabrielle Toledano. I was a small part of that larger machine. But it's a fascinating question. It's actually a question that I've thought quite a bit about, because in order I believe for me to be good at my work and for me to achieve the purpose that I've set out for Talentism, I think you first have to start with that belief that you have to know yourself. I'm very much a believer that, the ultimate tool each of us is given to craft our lives and achieve whatever success we set out to, that tool is us. And you have to take full responsibility for that. And you have to, over time, learn about it. I think a lot of good science sort of shows that it's pretty baked about 14, 15 years of age. And then you're spending the rest of your time trying to figure out what's inside the code. For me, there's been a ton of work to try to understand like what motivates me. And I think what it comes down to is I had this very interesting relationship with the world of business, because my father was a reluctant businessman who really did not enjoy his work and brought that home with him. And I was the oldest of 4 boys. And, he would be in and out of work, or he would hate his boss or whatever. And that would come through to the dinner table. And I think a lot of people who experience that kind of thing would want to move away from that experience. Like, I am not going to be a business person. I'm going to be something else. And I'm no different. I really wanted to be a writer. So I was going to be a writer. I was never going to work in the world of business, nothing. But I also had this unfortunate tendency of spending money unwisely. And so I needed a job in order to be able to survive. So I was always caught between these two worlds of not wanting to be in the world of business, but really needing to work. And that creates this very sort of interesting tension where you always feel sort of an outsider to the insider experience. You feel like everyone else is, knows what career they want, and they know where they're going, and they know what they're doing. And what I felt was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to play this game my way. Because I saw the way, Dad played it, and it just seemed to be so miserable for him. And also, I came to learn later in life what really animates me at Talentism, to start Talentism and do the things we do here is, when you experience somebody you care about going through that kind of pain, and you experience someone who you really look up to as not being able to fulfill their potential because he was a brilliant, brilliant person, and often felt like, as a CFO of a company, he wasn't listened to or whatever. You sort of, as a kid, develop this thing of, I want to make the world better for people like Dad. Now, that's not a conscious thought. You understand later that's sort of in your operating system because of that, and that's how I've made sense of it. But I'd say the combination of those things has led me on this really fun, cool journey of trying to do work, but be outside of the world of work and trying to make it better at the same time. And so that led me to a lot of entrepreneurial experiences starting at the age of 18. I co-founded my first company when I was, just out of freshman in college. And entrepreneurism And foundership was always a way that I could do that. I could, sort of control my own destiny, build something I was proud of, not really have to play the game everybody else was telling me is the way you had to play it. And then as I got older, the dot I connected was what gave me a great sense of meaning and a place in the world and helped me make sense of my life is when I was helping others to unleash their potential. And when I was doing that, I felt most grounded to who I am and why I'm here. And so then that became sort of the combination of things, sort of this outsiderness, trying to do things a different way, trying to help people unleash their potential, trying to help build great businesses, but try to deeply understand like why so many people suffer in business. And when I say suffer, I don't just mean like it's a miserable emotional experience. I mean like great business people who have these great dreams of bringing products or services to market and changing the lives of their customers, and it just doesn't happen. And so to me, that was almost worse. Hating your job is one thing. Devoting your life to something that doesn't work out seemed to me to be even worse. And so I really just became very connected to this idea of helping founders and helping people who are trying to build something, especially in the midst of a lot of change and transformation, helping them, achieve their dreams. And so I'd say that's how I've ended up where I am. It's in retrospect that, you're very kind and you say I've had this great career, but I can tell you as I was going through it, everybody thought I was nuts and everybody was really questioning why I hadn't followed the path of others, go get my MBA and, go to a good company and work my way up the ladder. Why did I keep jumping around? Why was I starting companies and then going back into big companies? And I think it's only in retrospect that journey makes sense to me as the act of self-discovery. So I could come to a place where I could really determine why, what my purpose was, and then have Talentism be the embodiment of that work.
It's so interesting that instead of going in order of the careers, you went in order of your, I'd say, philosophical or consciousness path. I mean, your father at the dinner table, which by the way resonates for me. My dad was always kind of, I'd say, victimized by his job. And I similarly had misgivings or I'd say uncertainties around whether I wanted to get into business at all because it just seemed so miserable. But that's a very to me kind of victim mentality, which you turned into by me, through your work and starting companies and then through you in terms of empowering CEOs and leaders to go do great things. And now you're doing it through others. And like, what a cool, what a really neat way to think about your life. Where do you think you started hitting your stride? And I know that's a little bit tough. It's not like someone tells us when that happens, but maybe take a stab at where Jeff Hunter started hitting his stride.
Well, honestly, I hope I haven't yet. And because I feel like every day I get to get a little bit better. And so I've long thought that I want my best day to be my last day. And so if you're just building, compounding and building up a little bit every day, and you have joy in that, including in how terrible that can feel from time to time, how hard that work is, that life would sort of be this thing of, you've really sort of hit your stride right about the point that the game's over. But what I would say is I think careers have formative moments, and those formative moments, how you react to those moments really sort of determines whether you unleash your potential or not. And the more terrible the formative moment is, the more you sort of have these like amazing stories that come out of them, or you just watch people sort of, for good reason, but sort of crumble under that. And I have one formative moment. It was just a very bad, very valuable, and I'm grateful for it, work experience where I came out of it and I felt terrible about myself. And I really questioned whether I had anything to offer to the world and questioned whether, frankly, I could even, sustain my family, support my family. And that took a while to work through and understand, but it was around that time that I started to realize, like, I would go out and tell people what I was going to do and start Talentism. And again, I was going through this severe crisis of confidence, and people would tell me I couldn't do it. They told me in very loving, supportive ways. Just to be clear, they were like, "Oh, why don't you just do this thing you were doing?" And for whatever reason, either because I'm just stubborn or whatever the case may be, I decided no, I wanted to die trying. And now that we mostly are doing it, I realized like I couldn't have gotten here and hit this moment, which frankly is better than any prior moment in my career by far. Like the people I work with, the work I do, what I've been able to create, what I've been able to create with others, et cetera. This is the best moment of my work life, bar none. There's just no way I would have gotten to that without that horrible experience. And so I would say like the inflection point that brings me here today is going through that big dip in my career, feeling like I was stupid, feeling like I was lost. Honestly, feeling like I wouldn't be able to uphold my basic responsibilities as a father and husband and son and brother. That was really the moment I feel like I look back with the most gratitude for, to be able to get to this point.
And was that before you started Talentism? Was it in 2010? Is that about right? Or
2013.
2013. Was it before you started Talentism or during the formation of Talentism, where you had your kind of near death or whatever experience that you're describing?
Before Talentism.
Okay. So the chunks of your life that I'm aware of, what'd you get out of college? You got a degree in philosophy and history, as I understand it. Maybe that's maybe
right.
Fact check me on that.
That's right.
What did you get out of college?
So I would say like college had a couple of really valuable things about it for me, or maybe three that I can go through. One is I met a professor named Dr. Bryce Harris who convinced me to be a part of this nonprofit organization called Project Amigos, where during the weekends, Occidentals in Los Angeles, during the weekends, we would get in cars and drive down to Mexico, and we would build houses for people who quite literally had no shelter. And I would say that was an incredibly formative experience over those 4 years, to be exposed to the people who are going through that. And just that so opened my eyes to so many things. That's number one. Number two is I'd say my relationship with a guy named Brad. He was one of my best friends in high school. We went to college together, and at the end of freshman year, he came to me. I was thinking, what am I going to do for work? Like, I'd been working since a very early age. I knew I was going to have to go back during the summer and get a job. And he said, hey, I think we should start a company together. And that was just sort of one of those iconic founder stories, not in that it had some big result, but, we slept on the floor of a garage and ate box macaroni that we sort of rustled out of the storage bins in the back of a grocery store. It was like that kind of existence. And if I hadn't gone to Oxy and been with Brad, that just never would have happened. He really changed my life. And then the third thing is I'd gone into college believing I was going to be an attorney. My grandfather, who I admired greatly, was a very well-known attorney, and he was this sort of bigger than life character. And I always wanted to be him. And I went to college and started to figure out like a philosophy degree is a great way to expand your mind and head towards this legal degree. And it was probably about halfway through college that my grandfather said, the world doesn't need any more attorneys, son, and you're not very good at it, so you should probably drop that. And so I was stuck with this philosophy degree, no future prospects, my grandfather's dismissal, and a philosophy degree, which I feel very fortunate to have, is not a great thing to build up a life of certainty. It's about questioning yourself. I would come out of these philosophy classes and I felt like all the students were having a mental breakdown because everything that they thought they knew was just being challenged. And that way of thinking of not accepting anything as valid until it's thoroughly investigated sort of going to the dark spaces to investigate what most people take for granted. I really feel like philosophy in college gave me that, but that's a pretty rough road. And from a career prospects, it's not a road to fortune. But I'd say those three things really is what I got out of college.
I know you had some experiences like at Connor Peripherals, as I understand it, and some other sort of dots, but just because EA is so identifiable, I mean, it basically created the category of in the kind of intersection of entertainment and gaming, during a very prolific time in Silicon Valley. What years were you there, and what were, I mean, kind of do the same routine with it? Like, what did you get out of that experience that stacked your life?
I'll talk about that, but you mentioned Connor Peripherals, and today everybody's so excited about rapid growth and everything. But I would ask anybody who's interested in iconic Silicon Valley success stories to check out Connor Peripherals. At the time, it was the fastest growing company in history, and I think I showed up like around employee 100, and I left 4 years later when it was 13,000 employees, and it was a manufacturing firm. It wasn't software, and so that was a very much a formative experience for me. And my first big job out of college was that, and it just really helped inform how I think about growth and potential and how you build a business, all that kind of stuff. Electronic Arts was 2005 to 2009. And I loved EA, really loved that experience. What a great company. Got to work with amazing people, worked inside of human resources. And that, in our work today, sometimes we work with HR. And so it really gave me an understanding of what HR professionals go through, what they face again, what they're faced with. And what was cool about EA, people didn't know this at the time. There was a number of things that I loved about it. One is digital entertainment about that time was the most successful form of entertainment. Like the launch of a game would earn more money in its first weekend than a box office blockbuster. And so it really was this global form of entertainment before movies became a global form of entertainment. And that was cool to be in a global company with a global responsibility and have that perspective. I think entertainment industry is super fascinating because I'm a creativity junkie, and that ain't nothing but creativity. And it's incredibly cool. It's like everything you got to do to make a movie plus coders and, visual experts and all kinds of stuff. It's just an amazing group of people to make that art come to life and make it as immersive as it is. The technology at that point, I haven't kept up with it as much since 2010, but the technology at that point was incredibly cutting edge. Frame rates and the amount of pixels and polygons and things that they were putting into every frame that showed up in your video game. It was just amazing technological achievement to have that. And then, there was this experience at EA that I had, which I haven't often reflected upon, but I recently recalled to me. Part of my job was going to all the studios because EA had a bunch of like independent studios that were affiliated under their publishing arm, was to fly to these studios and talk to the leaders of these studios about what they wanted. And I flew to, I think it was in England, that could be wrong, but I think it was in England. And I spoke to this iconic creator of one of their best titles. And I was talking to her, and I think she, if I'm not mistaken, like you, a former Olympic athlete. And she was saying, Jeff, it takes roughly 110, 120 people. That's how big the teams were back then to create this game. And, I don't want to employ any of them. There's about 3 or 4 people that come together and have this dream for this game, and we want to build it. But so much of our time gets taken managing people, gets taken trying to manage the operations and people of this thing. It really diminishes our creativity. And it's not about how great the people are. They're fantastic. We love working with them. But management is a hard job. And it'd be great if you could figure out someone else who could do it. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to accomplish that while I was at Electronic Arts. But that is very much part of what Talentism does today. And I credit her for putting that idea in my head. So those are the things, such an incredibly creative group of people, so very successful. And really, I think it was that I was there at sort of the vanguard of the digitization of entertainment. And it felt great to be there during that time.
And in the opening, it sounded like you had, for lack of a better word, a boss, a leader of the people group that you really looked up to. Can you kind of expound on that for a sec?
Yeah, Gabrielle Toledano. Well, I was hired by a gentleman named
Cool
Rusty.
sounding name, by the way. I mean, you cannot not be cool when that's your name.
Well, and she is tremendously cool. Yeah. The more you got, she was one of those people, the more you got to know her, the cooler she got. Like it was, her backstory was fascinating. Her father was fascinating. She was just amazing. But I was hired by a gentleman named Rusty Roof, formerly of Pepsi, who was sort of the iconic HR leader in Silicon Valley around that time. Still, occasionally talk with Rusty. He's an amazing fellow. He left in pretty short order after I showed up, and then Gabby, to her friends, came in and took over. The thing I learned from Gabrielle is sometimes the best work is just getting shit done. And, I struggled with that because to me, work is first and foremost about learning, not just execution. So if you've got a limited time to be productive and you're constantly being disrupted, like new technologies, new ways of working, all those kinds of things. Basically, your superpower is learning. There's no single skill that's more important than every day trying to get a little bit better, because that's the only possible way to adapt to the amount of change that's coming at you every day. That's always been my belief, and that's a big part of what we do at Talentism. But Gabby was just so good at saying, like, yes, learning is critical, but sometimes you put your head down, you just get shit done. And I think if I hadn't, respected her and admired her as much as I did, I don't think I would have taken that to heart. But she was so successful and she did such great work that it sort of opened my eyes to that. And she also gave me a lot of trust very early. Like both she and Cindy Nicola, who was the head of recruiting, who recruited me along with Rusty, they gave me a lot of trust early. And I've always really appreciated that and been grateful for it.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I wish I didn't have to do this job so I could just spend my time learning.
Yeah.
I get that. I've changed my day's routine to force enough time to learn, but I was only able to do that, at a certain point in my career. I couldn't tell my bosses when I wanted to work and when I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. And you probably couldn't have been a successful business founder or executive if you hadn't, I guess, reconciled the learning to GSD ratio that maybe Gabby helped you conceptualize. So
I've come to believe they're indistinguishable. I really believe that.
Well, I want to get to that. Did you go from EA to Bridgewater? Was there an intermediate gig between? Because I could not find that in your bio.
Yeah, I went to Dolby Laboratories. They make the audio codec. Now they're in vision and movies, cinema, the sound. But another very cool, Ray Dolby founded Dolby Laboratories. Such a cool story. And that was a great company, hired by a guy named Andrew Dahlkemper, wonderful guy. Yeah, it was a great privilege to work there. And frankly, I thought I'd be working there quite some time until I got the call from Bridgewater. I really didn't have any aspirations to anything other than that.
All right. Well, I hate to do it, but we're going to double click on Bridgewater. I mean, in my little world of finance, it's kind of a legendary organization. I think it was started 1975 or something like that. Ray Dalio, the author of the book Principles, which was more or less kind of a manifestation of the principles that he used to build the firm. They've got like $100 billion in assets. They actually made money in '08 during the crises, which only sort of elevated Ray's and the firm's reputation as being smarter than everybody else on Wall Street. I guess what made him, though, most famous was like his crazy maniacal culture. And by crazy and maniacal, using culture as a bona fide lever to creating alpha in managing money, which I think before Ray, culture and Wall Street, they just didn't really talk to one another. I mean, he did things like videotape and record meetings and have believability meters going on everyone's heads. And I mean, he's an amazing human being that did something very crazy and has been very successful doing it his way. What in the world was it like running talent and recruiting for Ray Dalio? I'm just dying to know.
Well, so recruiting for Bridgewater is an unusually difficult thing to do. So let's just add up the picture. So the first thing you're doing is you are trying to sort the world for quite literally the smartest people. I've never worked with smarter individuals in my life than I worked with at Bridgewater. And that's because the standards were so high, not just for raw intelligence, which I think, Ray would call brightness, but also this smartness, this conceptualization, this ability to see bigger pictures and be able to understand more complex things, synthesize more complex pictures. So working with that group of people, every day you showed up and you just had to play the best game ever. Like there's just no day you got to take it easy. That was number one. Number two, in order to at least be passable at that responsibility, you really had to understand Bridgewater and be able to represent it well. And frankly, I don't know that I ever met that standard, but you had to study a lot in order to be able to understand all those principles. And, you were tested on it every week. And so you had this intense job that was a full-time job. The recruiting department at Bridgewater was, if you included both full-time people and all the contractors and search agents and everything, it was hundreds of people. And so you had this very large department in this very intense place, and it's a very important job. And yet you also have to keep studying and learning and, do the tapes and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say the pressure was intense, but that pressure it elevated my thinking more than any possible college experience I could have had. I sort of consider it like the most advanced MBA on the planet. I do not have an MBA. I know a lot of people do. And when I compare what I learned at Bridgewater to what they learned, I think I got the better end of that deal. And then, of course, the culture was this thing that both was being talked about a lot in the press and often misrepresented, not always, but often misrepresented. And that had this thing of like the people who you might want to recruit read that stuff and said, I don't want any part of that. And the people who were just looking for a thrill were lining up, outside the door. Like, oh, yeah, I could do this. And that's a tough brand to try to navigate when you're trying to attract people, because you're trying to reach people that sort of dismiss you because they've got this idea in their head about what it's like. And at the same time, the people are really eager to try are often, coming across more as like, this is a challenge. I can prove to you I'm smart. I can prove to you that I'm conceptual. I can prove to you those things. And so I would say like, and then finally you had to get people who wanted to come work in Westport, which is where I'm sitting now. And I absolutely love Westport and I can't imagine living anywhere else, but it's a tiny place, and the main office for Bridgewater was sort of out in the woods of Westport. And so you got this thing of like, you're going to uproot yourself. You're going to come to Westport. You're going to have the hardest job you're ever going to have. You're going to be in this culture of just incredible transparency, truth, all those challenges. It's going to be every day. You're going to have to master a ton of things. And Bridgewater paid well, but not by Wall Street standards. I mean, it wasn't nuts. And Ray felt he wanted to pay north of fair. So I couldn't swing around big paychecks in order to sort of overcome all those hurdles. And so it was really a fascinating sort of challenge from a recruiting perspective. You had to build these incredibly tight operational, what they called, Bridgewater called machines, to create, hundreds of thousands of interested people to get to thousands of applicants to get down to like hundreds of hires. So you had to have this massive funnel of data that you had to get down to come up with the final people that you wanted to extend offers to. And that had to work pretty reliably because Bridgewater was growing so fast, and you had to deliver on that schedule, and you had to meet the highest possible standards on the most rigorous schedules. And so I would say it was sort of a unique management challenge. And I feel grateful for having had the chance to do it.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, I mean, it sharpened you maybe more than any of these other things in short order. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's get to Talentism. I want to know a little bit about what was the ignition? What were you doing when you're like, okay, like I've done this really cool career, mostly around the people side of the business. I'm going to go start my own company now. What were you trying to accomplish, and what was going to be unique about Talentism that you didn't see in the marketplace at that time that gave you your own belief in the model and your ability to build it?
So I was about 2.5 years into my career at Bridgewater. I realized, Bridgewater was not the place for me, despite how grateful I was for the opportunity. I gave notice, and I gave a 6-month notice. It may have been 8 months, 6 months. And Bridgewater is the kind of place where you can do that, which in and of itself is an interesting sort of experience, because you definitely are a lame duck for a long period of time. And that's a difficult place to be in a culture like that. But one of the reasons I did it is I both had commitments I wanted to keep at Bridgewater, people and projects that were meaningful to me, but also I wanted to give my time to think about what was next. And I came up with a couple of principles. I believe principles are important for navigating big decisions, because otherwise it's easy to get lost in all the noise of all the options and, confusion, et cetera. And so one is I wanted to make sense over those 6 months about what my purpose was in life. And that has been a big question I'd asked myself over a very long period of time. But I was like, I have to come up with an answer to that question. I don't want my work to be about money anymore. I'm not sure it ever was. I'm not super money motivated, but man, I've always had, maybe it's the philosophy degree. It's like sort of a sense of mortality, and like someday this all ends. And when it all ends, what does it all mean? And so I've never really viewed my career as a series of steps. I've viewed it as like, what's the experience I want to have, and what do I want to gain, and towards that, best final day. So I wanted to give myself time to think about purpose. And I wanted to give myself time to think about, what are the things I knew or I had learned that I felt were insightful? No matter where I took whatever I was going to do, what did I learn that would create the foundation for my work? So it wasn't just purpose, but it was also like the insights I felt I had gained over time and the things I had learned the hard way. I'd tried a lot of stuff. I'd failed a lot, and I constantly was learning every day. And so what were the things I learned? And so what I'd say, I went through a very rigorous process to understand my purpose. And that process was, I reflected back on my entire life, and I tried to determine any outcome that I had had a hand in creating that I found deeply meaningful. Because I felt that signal of meaning, that feeling of meaning, was the signal of purpose. And then I took all that data, because I was able to collect a lot of things like, wow, I really felt good about having helped with that, or helped that person in that way, whatever it was. And then I sorted that into, okay, what am I compulsive about? So in Talentism, we have this theory of human potential, which is that your purpose is really your compulsion times meaning. In other words, what is the work that you can't stop doing? And even if you could stop, you wouldn't, because it's just sort of an identity and the work you keep coming back to. Even if you're not getting paid, you just keep coming back to that work. And then the second was, when you're doing that work, what are the outcomes you create that are so meaningful to you? Give you a sense of place and identity and a sense of meaning.
Would you repeat that? So it's the arithmetic part?
Yeah. So purpose is compulsion times meaning. The compulsive element of work is a multiplier of meaning, and meaning is a multiplier of compulsion. And you have a flywheel that starts going where you're doing these things that you just can't imagine not doing. And then you're producing these results that are deeply meaningful to you. And then that sort of gives you more fuel to go back to the compulsion. And by the way, that loop can work in very negative ways with addictions, et cetera. And so I'm just saying, like, what would be the positive feedback loop in your work that would have you just keep showing up for that every day? And when I went through that, I developed this phrase one night, and I said, I think when I add that whole thing up, I want to systematically unleash human potential. And that's Talentism's purpose phrase since day one, since the day I started it. I think everybody who's been here has heard it 1,000 times. If they haven't, I'm not doing my job, because all of our work, all the product work, all the focus we put on our people and on our customers originates from that. And even though it's a short and simple phrase, it really breaks down to there is a system that either enables or disables human potential. We want to deal with specifically what human beings are like, what science tells us human beings are like. Potential is how do we help people discover what they are capable of and turn it to productive means. And so it was this thing of like, how do we create a new system that sustainably and predictably unleashes what people are capable of in commercial context, in business? And so I saw that and it clicked, and I thought, man, this is it.
Did you get that feeling like in your stomach or somewhere where you're like, okay,
yeah,
that's it?
Yeah, for sure. I had that intuitive, that intuitive click. I remember I was driving; it sort of popped up in front of me, as most cool, creative things do, and I actually had to stop the car. I'm like, "That's it. That's it. That's my life right there."
Such a good feeling.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And then the second thing I got my mind around is, this is not a question I think most founders would ask themselves, and it probably demonstrates them a little bit weird, but I was like, okay, are you going to be happy dying a failure if you do this? And, people ask me why I asked that phrase. Well, changing the system that limits human potential is a lifelong work that I'm never going to fully succeed at. Like, we've worked with over 1,000 companies and thousands of leaders, and I think we've had quite an impact. And that is a drop in the bucket compared to the work that needs to be done and the opportunity that exists. And I'm 59. So someday, this will all be done. And hopefully it's much more at that point than just a drop in the bucket, but it still won't be at all, everything. And so you got to wrap your head around that. And then with regards to that question of like, what were the insights I had? I'd been on this very cool founder's journey where in building businesses, first software businesses and then services businesses, I was always in these positions where I was sort of an underdog or disadvantage. And there was this one particular moment that was especially cool. We closed an A round. Dr. Mitch Weil and I had co-founded this company called Datamain. We later renamed Euphorion. And we finally decided to go get an institutional round of funding. We went and got an A round. It was 6.5 million, which back then, this was 97, I think.
That's a big check.
That's a big check in 97, right? And we were riding high. And we learned through Mitch, because Mitch was big in the world of search engines, that these two guys named Larry and Sergey had secured a $25 million A round, which really a lot of Silicon Valley history can be drawn to that moment, like that check and what Sequoia did there. And I knew immediately Larry and Sergey were going to win. It wasn't just like the $18 million difference. It was, they just had something and we didn't have it. And I remember thinking we weren't competing in the market. We had a very different sort of software company, but we were competing for talent and we were losing. And so I wanted to figure out what it takes to be successful when you're the underdog. Like what does it take for you to win when you don't have all the capital and the product market fit and, all those things that really, I'm sure as an investor, you're sort of looking for or wanting to invest in. And that was a big starting point for me digging deep into this concept of like systems and potential. Because ultimately what I had to figure out how to do is take that 6 million and make it as productive as 25. And so that was really where I started probing in deeply, and just given how my mind works. At first I went out to the market and I drew up a list of like 75 people who I thought would be great thought leaders. Like they knew the answer to my question. I'm just going to ask them the question and boom, I'm done. And so I went and talked to these people, incredibly generous of them to speak with me. I knew absolutely nothing, but their answers didn't make a ton of sense to me because they weren't grounded in data, first principle thinking, or scientific rigor. It was all like GE did it this way, so that must be what's right. And I'm like, we're nothing like GE. That's not even correlative. I don't understand why you're saying that. So that just became this obsession with me to crack this code on like, what is it about human beings in the context of work that leads them to build amazing things or to fail? And that became sort of my journey of figuring out the answer to those questions. And what does science tell us about the human mind and how the human mind processes information and how context sensitive it is, and how like, what are we, primatology, got deep into primatology. Like, what does that tell us about human beings? Like when we're mostly like apes, like hairless primates, which is what we are. How do we react in groups? How do we think about hierarchies and social structure and status? A lot of anthropology, what do primitive tribes tell us about how people show up independent of context, all those kinds of things. And I came up with this insight, which Talentism is largely built on, which is there are two things that are true. One is confusion is a normal state of affairs in a rapidly changing environment. And so people understand what confusion is broadly. I mean, we have a very specific definition for it, but like you're sort of walking along and something weird happens and you go, huh? Like that's your mind trying to make sense of what the heck it's taking in, right? And so if you're in a fast growth industry or you're trying to go from zero to one or whatever the case is, all that's predictable about your future is the unpredictable nature of change. And human beings don't do well with that. The mind, even though it's only 6% of your body weight, consumes 33% of your calories. It's a real energy hog, and you want to keep that thing humming as simple as possible. And so we've had things like habits and intuitions and instincts, all these tools that our mind provides us that are a low energy state of affairs of trying to make sense of the world. Because when you really get hit with confusion, it sucks up a lot of attention. And so this thing was happening where we were, where I had been working in these transformative companies, or, the culture was amazing, or the industry was amazing, or the product, whatever it was the fastest growing company in history. And what I saw is like, it was just confusion all the time. And I realized that most of the industry I thought Talentism could compete in, was based on the concept of how do I get rid of that confusion? If someone's confused, it's because something went wrong. Like they weren't properly prepared in some way to take on their work or do the thing that's important. But I thought, you know what? Actually, what if you asked yourself, why is confusion good? Like what if confusion wasn't bad, but instead was just a natural reaction of a human being in a tough situation? And I realized that confusion is the initiation point of all effective learning, always. And that it recalled me to my philosophy degree in the work of Karl Popper, where basically he was like, look, the only way you learn anything is you like have to hit this point where you understand you're wrong. And confusion is sort of where there's a mismatch between this unconscious mental model you got about how things should work and the experience you're having. So you're wrong. Like their confusion is because you're wrong in some way. And so like I thought, this is beautiful. We can use this sort of inexhaustible resource of confusion to create high performance. But what we have to do is build this system that identifies confusion early, because if you don't deal with confusion, it does metastasize into terrible, terrible people outcomes. So how do you catch confusion early? How do you build the skills for people to be able to productively communicate and talk about that and process it? And then how do you create a methodology to consistently take that ever-present confusion and turn it into clarity and therefore competitive advantage, both for an individual and a business, an enterprise? And I realized like I had a point of view about that methodology. I had a point of view about what was happening and how to create that process to turn confusion into clarity. And that was the insight. And so this is a very long answer to your question, but I was sitting there and go, okay, I know my purpose. I want to systematically unleash human potential. It's a big, hairy, audacious job that I'm going to die, largely a failure, but it's going to be like the puzzle to crack every day of my life for the rest of my life. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to meet fabulous people. It's going to be a great journey. And then I have an insight I haven't heard anywhere else or seen anywhere else. I think the future is going to be filled with more confusion, not less, which, by the way, over the last 11 years, I think we can pretty much put that in the bag. That's what's happened. And I think I've got a product, both in the methodology and then the way I can deploy that through software and coaching and training and, all these other things. I think I got products that actually can be a market winner and do well by doing good. Like, these products will actually help people discover who they are, become more productive, and live better lives, build better businesses. And that's the whole reason I'm in this. So that's how we got to where we are.
Okay. So, it's not going to be hard for me to ask dumb questions because I'm way over my head, but I'm going to do it anyway. So we throw around these words all the time, but what is your view on 360-degree reviews in general? Like, basically every company in our portfolio does it. I do it as a leader here at Rallyday. All of our people do it. We're getting feedback and data points from people above us, lateral and quote unquote beneath. And that feedback ends up prescribing some potential changes to behavior that might drive better performance for the individual the following year. What is your view on that data generally and the way that companies are doing this, quote unquote, normally?
Yeah. So when I was at Electronic Arts for a period of time, I was the head of EA University, which was the learning and development arm of EA. And as part of that, we were responsible for hiring people to do 360s. And that was also, for certain people, part of our performance development process. And I was never able to find any correlation in any data, definitely no causation, but no correlation between a 360 and an effective behavior change. I just never could ever form that correlation. I got a lot of people who seemed to have some behavior changes, and then I could figure out better reasons that happened than they heard about something in a 360. So for years, at Talentism, we wouldn't do 360s. And then I had this one client who recently sold his company, an Andreessen Horowitz company, incredible guy. But he said, look, I'm just not going to keep using Talentism if you don't do a 360.
That'll take care of that.
That takes care of that. And he was a very, very forceful guy. And so I was like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, I'm not going to do it like everybody else, because I really believe that 360s often turn out to be more harmful than helpful. So the first thing we did is we tried to figure out why more harmful. Well, the first thing that happens is most 360s include quotes. So what happens every time you give a 360 and you include quotes? 100% of the time, people look for attribution. They say, oh, I bet Fred said that, or I bet. Now, why would your mind jump to that? Your mind jumps to that to rationalize that point of view and either overinterpret it or dismiss it. Yeah. That's what your mind is seeking to do,
Jeff
right?
has never liked the way I dress, and he doesn't like my politics, and so he found something to pick on me for.
Exactly. So either you're going to, what we saw is people took it way too hard. Oh my God, the person with power hates me. Or that idiot, I couldn't care less what they say, right?
Love that.
So already it's not working, because that's neither of those things is the outcome you want from the 360, right? The other thing that was one of our insights is, in a hierarchy where somebody has power and authority, like a CEO, one of the reasons you're doing a 360 is because they have blind spots. They don't know how they're affecting other people. They don't know how their behaviors are being interpreted. They don't know the stories other people tell about them. And so they're gathering data in order to improve their performance. But when you go out to a group of people and you ask a sort of open-ended questions, can you name something you really like about this person? Or sometime they really helped you. These really sort of big open-ended questions. A lot of times you're talking to people who are, by definition, confused by the person they're evaluating, or are blind to how they feel about that person because they're in a power dynamic or something like that. So the data you're getting is not terribly helpful. It's like we have this sort of, one of our principles of Talentism is don't ask a tourist for directions. And right, because they'll tell you. If you go up to somebody who's brand new, I love walking through downtown Manhattan or midtown Manhattan in the middle of the holiday season, I could go up to Rockefeller Plaza and ask somebody how to get to One World Trade, and they'll tell me, and they almost certainly don't know, right? It's just
Or ask them like, what's a good restaurant around here? And they'd say Applebee's.
yeah, exactly.
And you're like perfect.
Right. And so a lot of times these people you're asking for feedback, even though they're either reporting to or they're impacted by this person, you're asking them to form an opinion about another person that is fundamentally based in their filtering of their own experience. And so most of the respondents don't know themselves well enough to understand how they're applying that filter. And they don't know themselves well enough to be able to say, well, actually, over the course of the last 12 months, when I look at the pattern of interactions, the thing that seems most prevalent to me is instead what's happening, the third problem is recency bias. It's like, well, he was a jerk to me yesterday, so that's what the feedback is, right? So it was for all these reasons, we're like, okay, we don't want to do any of that. So what we did is we took a look. We had done interview-based 360s over a period of time where we didn't give quotes and everything, but we gathered a lot of anecdotal and qualitative data from a lot of people about leaders. And we processed that data and said, okay, we think in the areas in our structure of how we think about work, we can identify the behaviors that seem to produce the most clarity and the most confusion and what we call the most certainty when leaders do them. So if they do this and they do it well, it seems to produce, results that are up and to the right. If they don't do it, confusion. And if they do the opposite of this thing, then in fact, they cause a lot of harm. And then what we did is we created a survey instrument to go out and ask respondents like, did they do this? Did they not do this? Have they done this? Did they do the opposite of this or not this? And through that, we come back with this picture that is actually, here's the results you're producing as a leader or manager because of these specific behaviors. And so the work of the coach, because we always do the 360 with what we call a clarity manager, what most of the industry would know as a coach, the clarity manager then takes that data and works with their client to actually start gathering more evidence about what is triggering those behaviors. So sometimes the behaviors are triggered because you just are ignorant. You just a blind spot. Like, I didn't know that was a good behavior. Other times, it's a good behavior, but you lose sense of self or a sense of agency or autonomy in a situation because you're what's known as triggered. You're like emotive reactive to a situation. And it doesn't matter how much you're sort of on autopilot at that point. And so then that helps us understand what are the contexts and structures that drive that behavior and how can we change those rather than try to change the behavior. So that's how we think about 360s.
And we're doing one with one of our CEOs together this year. We're teeing that up, I think, right now. We're working with your team. And I think we're doing both. I think we're getting feedback on our CEO, and that CEO is going to get this feedback in your methodology versus the quote unquote standard methodology. I also think that we're going to gather data on how I, as a private equity member of this CEO's team, is creating either confusion or clarity or certainty, and how I may be playing a factor in his, performance or behavioral performance in a good way and a bad way. My dream is that through that process, we'll reveal some learnings where I can show up better for him, which will then help him show up better for his executive team and, so forth and so on. Is that, I'm really asking you this question as a client on this podcast. Is that basically what we're going to be doing, Jeff? Maybe help me understand this a little better.
Yeah. So we start with this core belief that in order for someone to really become unleash their potential, find out these capabilities they have, they never knew they had, which by the way, everybody has them. That is a universal constant. You are born not being able to walk and talk. And then 4 years later, you can do both. And no one actually sent you to school to do it. So there's just a ton of capability in human beings that doesn't get unleashed unless you do set them up in the right system. So we believe that the CEO you're working with can become an even better CEO, not because we're evaluating against a standard, not because we're here's the 5 things every great CEO does. We don't believe in that. We've worked with thousands of CEOs and everyone is a little bit individual and does things a little bit different. So we want that CEO to be the best version of that person, not become someone else. And then, of course, the thing that stands in the way of them becoming that person is their own blind spots. It's not that they're bad or good or anything. It's they don't know. They don't know they're doing certain things. They don't know they feel certain ways. They don't know they're addressing other people and communicating in certain ways. So we start with the CEO, and we want to make sure they have that deep sense of personal responsibility and that commitment to this process. So they're not sitting there looking at their 360 and saying, if Ryan wasn't such a jerk, I could be so much better, right?
I talked to him this morning. He might say that from time to time, but it would be with a smile on his face.
Yeah, well, just to be clear, we all may feel that way from time to time. And some people really do get bad breaks and have every right to be pissed. But if your goal is to get better, you can't start by saying, I can get better once someone else changes. By definition, that never works. So in the work we're doing, we're focusing on the CEO and we're making sure they have that sense of personal responsibility, that commitment to this process, that commitment to growth. But now, listen, they're performing in a system, a bunch of other people. They got people reporting to them. They got the market they serve. They got their customers. And of course, they have you. They have Ryan. And you're an investor. And investors, one of our other principles is everybody's got a boss. By definition, I've never met anybody who didn't have a boss. Now, you've got your LPs and he's got you, all that stuff. And the thing about bosses or managers, and management is really the passion we have to figure out, because psychologically, bosses can cause a lot of damage because you hold the keys to the psychological kingdom. You can hire, fire, promote, demote. And that covers status, security, and membership, the big emotional triggers at work. Now, even if you're a minority investor, you're big on the cap table and you've got to be listened to. And so you can pose a threat to this CEO. And even if they take personal responsibility and they say, yes, I want to get better, we have to deal with the reality that there are power hierarchies and there are things that exist that can negatively impact that person. And when those things are happening, you're losing value, right? Because every day, you talked about it when we started talking, you talked about Nancy. I love that story. I've never met Nancy, but I'm dying to, because she basically was stating something that we believe to be true. Another one of our principles: the speed limit of growth for an organization is defined by the speed limit of growth of the CEO. And so the business cannot grow faster than the CEO. And so what you're trying to do is say, okay, as an investor, I want to create an optimal situation for this person's growth, because that guarantees the growth of the business, right? Or maybe not guarantees, but definitely increases the odds. So what am I doing? Ryan, what am I doing that limits growth? What am I doing, again, because I have blind spots, et cetera. So then we can give you that evidence and give you that information so that then you have it and you're saying, okay, well, in this relationship, the way I may be, limiting growth or limiting potential is because I do X, Y, and Z. And then that's your responsibility. So you're not saying oh, the CEO can't be effective because of me. The CEO isn't saying I can't be effective because of Ryan. Everybody owns their sort of own experience and their own potential and their own performance. But each person in that system can start to understand how they influence each other, such that we are all together either enabling potential, enabling this thing to be wildly successful, for us to be proud of the thing we've created, or limiting potential, which is I can't believe this thing didn't work out. We had a great product, we had great customers, we had great investors, and it just didn't perform the way we thought. That's the thing we want to prevent.
What a very simple, powerful idea around, are you either increasing or limiting potential of the people that you serve? I mean, that's just this is so cool. How does that then translate for this leader, this CEO, to it's a him in this case, his executive team, and then the employees of the company? I mean, is there also, what is your view on the relationship between the growth of the CEO? You were very strong on the point of growth of CEO, growth of company. Do you dip beneath the waterline and go into any work with kind of the learning environment or the system in which the employees are living to help them grow individually that might have an impact on the ultimate growth of the company? Or do you principally focus on the top, quote unquote?
Well, we're trying to create a system, and we want that system to impact everybody. And so we are not there to make leaders better and everyone else can go suck it. We are there because we want that entire company to be a potential unleashing machine. And by the way, we really fundamentally believe that is the origin story of capitalist success. It's like you maybe sometimes you get lucky, you got the right product at the right time, maybe you got the right capital partners at the right time. There's a lot of reasons you get lucky. But ultimately, if you want to take luck out of the equation, you got to set up this system in your company that is a learning system that unleashes potential, because that's the thing that can respond to any shock, that can process any confusion, can create any innovation, can actually take advantage of opportunities that other people miss. So that's what we're trying to do, top to bottom. Now, we start at the top because humans, as hairless primates, are a hierarchical species, hierarchical social species. So leadership matters, and management matters often even more.
Can you distinguish? I'm sorry, but these words mean something to me, and I tell me the difference between leadership and management.
Yes, leadership is the responsibility to create a different future. Management is the responsibility of achieving goals through the work of others.
So good. Thank you. I'm just like, that is so helpful to me. That's really cool. Thank you for that one.
So the CEO has this bold vision, hopefully, of what they want to create. They hopefully are an effective enough communicator to help people connect individually to the meaning of that vision. And then they have to operate in such a way as to create and increase trust so that people will follow them. Managers have to build systems to carry out that vision and actually productize it, deliver it, and service it. And so when you look at why companies fail, leadership is a problem, but management is the problem, because the more people you get working on something, the more confusing it gets. There's something called the Dunbar number, which is definitely not supported by science, but it's an interesting sort of thing. Like you reach sort of 150 people, and then you add 150 first, and all 151 are totally confused, right? 150 were all in line, 151 are totally befuddled.
There's some sort of tipping point at which confusion takes over.
That's right. In software development, it was called the Mythical Man Month. This theory has sort of permeated lots of different things, where as you get bigger and more complex, these organizations become sort of confusion machines. And they become confusion machines in predictable ways because of predictable patterns. And management is the hub, the nexus of the solution that creates clarity out of that confusion. And leadership is not. Leadership is still up in the clouds and saying, we got to go here. And when we do it, here's the thing we're going to have done. And like, you see me struggling and suffering for this, and that's why you should struggle and suffer for it as well. But everyday work has to get done. We got to convert that to like meaningful action. And that's the act of management. And so we hold those things as very different. And as you scale, management becomes every bit, if not more important than leadership, in making sure you build something great.
I love that you've connected the physics of growth to the physics of confusion, and sort of trying to teach and otherwise help the managers break that correlation between size and increase in size to increase in confusion is like a big idea. That's fascinating. Where are you on we're going to get to some randoms here just because we're kind of running out of time, and I've got some stuff I'm just dying to hear your opinions on. We are big believers in behavioral assessments, and we've worked with most of them. I mean, at a most basic level, I think I took a Myers-Briggs when I was like 10 years old, and it hasn't changed in all these years. But I didn't find it very actionable. It was sort of like, I'm an INTJ, and that's sort of funny, and explains why I can't be with people for too long, and it explains why this and that. But it didn't really help me improve my performance. We've used DISC. That sort of helped us understand, how people exert their leadership or managerial, strength. Like, what is their conduit? Are they, the D is like direct, I is influence or something like this? Is that,
yes,
is that
right.
The basic?
Yeah.
And then underneath you have the S and the I. And similarly, it helped us understand leaders kind of where they exert themselves. Like, what does that look like? And that was sort of interesting, but not necessarily helpful. We've been spending more time in the Enneagram of late because, to the words you were using previously, self-awareness, what are your default behaviors that are very likely your blind spots? The Enneagram does a quite nice job of saying, so I'm an 8. I say I'm a crazy 8. There's probably adjectives other people use besides crazy when describing my version of 8. But like, they've done a really good job of gradating it, saying like, when Ryan is under pressure in a severe way, these are his default behaviors that are going to be a problem in the system in which he's operating. And that has really helped me, I guess, pause when I'm confronted with a situation that will reveal those negative influences on the organizations in which I work. So I just given you like 3 different tools. There's insights. There's all this stuff.
Right.
Predictive index. Where are you on the study of behavioral assessments, and how do you use those in your work, and do you believe in them? What are some of your opinions on behavioral assessments?
We don't use them. Bridgewater used a number of assessments, and I had to become very deep in those assessments and understand them. Ray is very famous for talking about Myers-Briggs as an example, and hired the world's experts on Myers-Briggs like Bob Eichinger to come in and talk to us about it.
Pretty big name in that world.
Yeah, I learned a lot from Bob. So we have this let's just start here. When I started Talentism, my brother, who was at that point a protein biologist, but one of the smartest human beings I've ever met in my life, one of my younger brothers, he was sort of casting about for work, and we were talking a lot. And I said, you should work for Talentism, and what you should do is you should be my kid brother. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, I'm going to write a paper that asserts a certain thing about human behavior, and then you should come in and talk about how wrong I am and how bad my thinking is. And I said, actually, I'd really like that. I'd like that dynamic. I'd like that challenge. It will really sharpen my learning. I'd also like people to know that it's okay. Like, you can say something and be wrong, and not someone else can point it out, and you can learn. Like, that's okay. And as he and I were doing that work together, I said, why don't you go read all the peer-reviewed science about performance and behavior and tell me the one thing methodologically that everyone seems to do that you wouldn't do. That if you were trying to solve that problem, you wouldn't apply that particular methodological standard. And he went away for a while, and he came back, and we've ended up publishing a paper on it. But he came back and he said, okay, well, the thing that everybody does is they abstract context. And I said, okay, well, tell me more. What does that mean? He says, human beings actually don't perform independent of context. Everything is response stimulus. So a person who has the highest level of skill, like a woman like Renee Fleming, who I adore. She's an amazing opera singer, but she goes to La Scala, which is the home of opera, and she bombs. And, why is that? Why is somebody who's performed in all the great opera houses all over the world and obviously has a preeminent skill, why would they underperform there? It's context. And so context messes up data, because it's like, well, they perform some way here and perform some way there. And so that sort of gets abstracted out. So you can just sort of focus on, hey, what's the goal and what's the task and what does a person do? But in our mind, if you want to turn confusion to clarity, you got to deal with context. And you don't want to normalize human behavior. In other words, you don't want to say, like, there's good human behavior and bad human behavior. Of course, that's true. But what we want to do is instead find out, like, how could we take your strengths and weaknesses and optimize them productively? What would be the context or system that would happen in? And so we think about work design, interaction design. We use design methodologies and design thinking in order to think about, like, how are we going to shape that context? I find that when people use the behavioral instruments, some of which, like Myers-Briggs, don't stand up in any way, shape, or form to any scientific inquiry, others of which have reasonable, like PI, have reasonable backing for their assertions. But it's not whether the instrument itself becomes useful or not. In different contexts, it can. Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ. And so every time I meet an INTJ, I'm like, yes, we're one of the rarest subtypes of, right? It's a cool conversation. It actually could help us form a bond. It could
By
help
the way,
us.
I was in Venice once, and this guy had a hat, big hat on that had said INTJ on his hat. And I go to him, I go, why the heck do you have your Myers-Briggs type written on your forehead, like on your hat? Yeah. And he goes, because I just don't meet many of them. And when I do, I just get this like warm feeling. And so when I cruise around, it's just like a sense of kinship. And I was like, huh. Okay. Well, I'm an INTJ, and we're I don't think we're going to be hanging out but it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. Well, see, Ryan, what you just told me is you're not a strong I, because the strong I would not have run up to a guy with a hat.
My curiosity is so strong that it overcomes my I. I'm actually an 80 out of 100 I. If you can, and people get weirded out by that. But anyway, so what I'm hearing is there's a little bit of intent underlying in this, and which is to say, one of the things I don't like about assessments is this sort of like the intention is I want to include this person in this job, or I want to exclude them from this job.
That's right.
And you're in the business of saying, I want to help this person reach their full potential. And whether they're an INTJ or ENTJ or whatever the hell they are, a D, an I, an S, a C, an Enneagram 8 or a 3 or a 1, like I don't really give a shit. Right. I just want them to do really well. And if I need to shape the context or change some relational dynamics to help them get there, that's all I care about. I'm Jeff Hunter.
That's right. You nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. I aspire to a new system where someday we design work for people. Right now, we design people for work.
That is fascinating. I have used up more of your time than I told you that I would. I want to thank you. And I'd like to, I found this quote on your website. It was in one of your, I think you call them insights, but it was an insight that you were sharing that was very evidently written by you as opposed to anyone else in your organization. I'm just going to read it. I just want you to explain it to me because I think it might be an interesting way to leave this, what has been like a really cool conversation. I'm going to read it. It says, first we belong and then we believe. I commit to offer my belonging to communities I cannot presently witness. I commit to being a better follower. It was written by you. It's on your website. What does that mean? What were you thinking at that time? What was the context and what were you trying to communicate?
So I think one of the most joyful parts of living is discovering just how wrong you are. And because we're all wrong in some fundamental way. And if you can get over feeling bad about that, it's sort of cool to keep discovering your blind spots. And I have lived a life filled with privilege. I'm a tall, white guy, straight white guy in a world that celebrates tall, straight white guys. And if you grow up breathing oxygen, you don't talk about oxygen. You just think like, that's just the way it works. You're like, everybody's got this. I got it. Everybody's got this. And there was this, my kids who are much more aware and much more deep and wise than I am, were really starting to call me out and saying like, hey, Dad, I think you're blind to a lot of stuff. And, my oldest daughter is gay and was in a committed relationship. And she was like, I just don't think you understand a lot of your blindness. And so I was really thinking about that. And then George Floyd happened. And I was like, my God, I just don't know. I'm so blind. I so much live in this bubble. And so I wrote that sentence because I was like, look, I'm going to participate in communities and I'm going to be a follower in those communities. Like, I think, a guy like me typically wants to join a community to tell them what's wrong. Here's how you got to do it. Here's what you're going through. Here's what you got to do. And I was like, I don't know shit. So you got to join as a follower. Now, followership is sacred. And so I didn't just sort of blindly jump into a bunch of stuff, but I brought groups together of people who didn't look anything like me and hadn't had the privilege I have. And I listened to them for hours and hours and hours. And I just learned so much from that. And where I ended up is, it's interesting because it's become such a political football. I don't feel bad about who I am. Like, I don't feel guilty about being who I am. I'm just really grateful I got an opportunity to learn how much I've benefited from winning the genetic lottery. That like I had no part in any way, shape, or form with having this brain or my parents or being born in 1965 in America or whatever. So like, it's cool to win the lottery, and I feel, and I'm happy I did, but now what do I do with that? And again, I want to learn every day, and learning where others didn't win that lottery or didn't have that opportunity and how I could help them just was an incredibly joyful part of my work. And so that statement was a recognition of that.
Yeah, this just struck me as both strong and humble at the same time. And you don't meet people that are both those things at the same time very often. And you don't read comments like that from people very often. So thank you for opening up about what you were confronting at that time. I want to leave with just an admission. I hate the word potential. For me to listen to this word as many times as you've said it today, it's just hard on me.
Oh, and you faced it so bravely. Thank you.
I just have to, but it'd be dishonest for me not to tell you that it just grates me. And I think it has to do with this underdog thing. I always feel like had I lived up to my potential, I would be living in this town I grew up in with 1,200 people called Granby in Colorado. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with living in Granby, Colorado. It's actually a very beautiful place. But I guess I didn't grow up knowing that there was something bigger for me. And I've had to fight gravity for most of my life. And I've always asked people, not on a podcast like this, but when someone uses the word potential, I ask them, would you please just use the word possibility? Because for me, potential seemed limiting and possibilities felt like somehow I could dream my way to better, or I could work my way to better, that there wasn't some sort of potential that I was born with that was going to somehow limit where I was going to end up. And so I've lived with this philosophy of possibility. Meeting you and knowing the way you look at that word, the way you define potential is perfectly in concert and in harmony with the way I look at the word possibility. So I want to thank you for reconciling that. I don't think I'm ever going to ask anyone to change that word. I'm cool with potential now. And thank you for your enlightenment. Thanks for teaching me today. Thanks for helping me learn today. Thanks for participating in this podcast so that others can learn. I hope that 2025, when this podcast will come out, it'll be in early January. I hope it inspires other leaders to commit to 25 being about unleashing the potential of themselves and those that they serve, and make it just an exceptional year for everybody. So thanks, Jeff, for all your hard and impassioned work over such a long period of time. I think we're all very grateful for your mind.
Oh, thank you so much, Ryan. And I couldn't agree with you more. Here's to 2025 being an unbelievable unleashing of possibility.
Well said. Thanks.